Georgia said, the Supreme Court of Georgia said, to determine the influence which the principles of the common law, we should look to that law as it stood before the 14th day of May, 1776. See, every state adopted at least the original 13. Well, even after the original 13, they adopted on a specific date. They said before we declared independence, they said they was dropping bodies in 1774. And when they get before there was such thing as a Declaration of Independence, they said, "Oh yeah, we already started that. Sorry, yeah, we already got a law, and we already we're gonna declare it. We'll get there." I'm trying to see what happened. What happened on May 14th, 1776? May 14th, 1776. That boy Thomas Jefferson arrived in Philadelphia to join the Continental Congress. They said, get him his pen, let him get the writing. Let's see, what else? Well, they said Philadelphia was crowded and bustling. They said they were strapping up, boy. Yep, Thomas Jefferson said, give me the pen. That's when we became an official country, no? Well, July 4th, 1776 is when the United States of America became an official country, sure. Not on May 14th. That's just when Thomas Jefferson got there. They said, give him all the water and food he needs. We'll put him in a hotel. He's got to write this document for us. See, we don't know. In 1775, he had already wrote a document. And they said, no, we can't fight everybody. We just got to fight. Because in the Declaration, or not in the Declaration of Independence, 1 year before in 1775, Thomas Jefferson says that, they clean it up in the Declaration of Independence. They say, in 1775, Thomas Jefferson says, well, statutes have been passed extending the courts of admiralty beyond their ancient limits and depriving us of our accustomed and inestimable privilege of a trial by jury. See, there was 3 renditions of this thing called the Declaration of Independence. So the first one was in 1774, and they say it. They said this thing called the Roman Catholic Church has showed up to Canada or to Quebec, and they have abolished the free system of English laws. That's in the Declaration of Independence, but before it was there, it was in the Continental Congress Declaration of Rights. They say, yeah, this thing called the Roman, they named names. They was not playing. They said, no, we're going to say his name. The Pope is the one doing this. They are, I got it. I'm going to read it. Let's go to it. They say, yeah, no, say his name with your chest. Yeah, the Roman Catholic Church did this. That's who we're fighting. They said, no, we can't fight all the people that they're in contracts with. So you got to clean this up. All right. So then you get to 1774 and or 1775, and he says, okay. Well, statutes have been passed for extending the courts of admiralty beyond their ancient limits. All right. And then here it is. And then you get to the Declaration of Independence and they say, okay, clean it up one more time. And then he says, King George has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, right? And King George has given his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. He said, all right. So who were they really fighting? They say on May 14th, it took him 2 months. May, June, and then July. Okay, all right. Clean it up. Rewrite it. No, you got to rewrite it. We can't fight everybody. We're not gonna win this one, but we can't fight everybody. Because you start naming names saying the Pope did this, the Roman Catholic Church did this. Yeah, no, there will never be such a thing as a United States of America. Right? So in 1774, I don't know who wrote this, but it wasn't Thomas Jefferson. And mind you, Thomas Jefferson was like, he was like 31 when this happened. He wrote the Declaration of Independence at like 31. Let me see how old he was. He might have been 33. Thomas Jefferson, age when he wrote, yep, whatever. He was 33 in the summer of July, or in 1776, as a Virginian delegate chosen by the Continental Congress. That's where they were going. They say, yep, let him get in trouble. They say, yeah, let the young one get in trouble. Yeah. Yeah, no, he wrote. We didn't tell him to write all that. This is from the Continental Congress. So this was, they was already setting it up. They was getting ready. They've been dropping bodies in 1774 already. Because of the things, remember, y'all may not remember this. Probably y'all never heard of me. Okay, well, King George, so we're on King George III now during this time period, right? Well, King George I, King George II, they were not English. They were the King of England by blood, not by nationality. Okay, so they didn't care nothing about England. They didn't speak English. They never went to England. They did not care about England. All right, so what's that? King George I, King George II. They were, I think King George II, by the time he was like 40, he finally learned English. Like they did not care about England. They were Germans. They cared about Germany, right? And so King George I, King George II gave legislative sovereignty over to Parliament in Great Britain, in England. Okay, so Parliament is what we call Congress in ours. So in theirs, they're not ours. But the legislative branch, right? So they write the statutes, they write the codes, the ordinances, the decrees, all that stuff. Okay, well, because King George I and King George II didn't care about England, they said, oh, we'll just give it over to the, just give me my tax payment. That's all we care about. Okay, they said, oh, well, bet we can write whatever we want. This is the whole thing about this due process thing, right? So they said, oh, bet, yeah, don't you worry about that, buddy. We'll make sure you get your payment, right? And so these people called Jesuits, let that simmer, let that breathe. These people called Jesuits were like, consider them like, this is so weird. They would have been like the special forces for the Roman Catholic Church. That sounds so weird, but it is true. They took over Parliament under a fake act. So they said, oh, well, yeah, we'll pay, you'll get a little money. You write us in there, like we can take over. They were in charge of changing over the books. They were in charge of changing the language over. They were in charge of all the legislative writing. They wrote all the laws, right? So King George I, King George II gave legislative sovereignty over to Parliament. Okay, well, Parliament had been invaded by the Jesuits. Again, pausing for dramatic effect, right? So, okay. I think I did the timeline. I got a video about it on YouTube. Let's just say from the year 1711 up until like whenever King George III got appointed as king. Okay, I don't remember. I think it was like 1760 or something like that. Okay, well, by the time you get to King George III, okay, well, they've been taking over. They got all these fake acts. They got the Stamp Act. They got all these acts that presupposes that you magically owe them without due process of law. And if you don't pay it, then, I mean, the same thing we're dealing with today. And if you don't pay it, well, then we're just going to take your stuff and bring you in front of this guy called a magistrate. This guy in a black robe who also comes from the Jesuit order. Right? And so By the time you get to 1774, well, they're over it. They're not with it. So they named names in 1774. The Continental Congress said that the inhabitants of the English colonies in North America, by the immutable laws of nature, the principles of the English Constitution. What's the English Constitution, y'all? The Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was the English Constitution of their day. So they said the inhabitants of the English colonies in North America, by the immutable laws of nature, the principles of the English Constitution and the principles of the English Constitution, these several rights are entitled to the people of the colonies. Okay, so they said, okay, yep, they're entitled to life, liberty, property. Excuse me, they're entitled to life, liberty, property, and they have never ceded to any sovereign power whatever the right to dispose of their life, liberty, or property without their consent. They said before there was such thing as the United States Constitution, they said that off rip, that's why we're dropping bodies. They said, you want to know why we strapping up? We're going to tell you. Stay, put on your seatbelt. They said, yeah, this thing called life, liberty, and property has never been ceded to any sovereign power, whatever. And they said a right to and they don't have a right to dispose of either without their consent. They said our ancestors who first settled in these colonies, Virginia, 1607, were at the time of their immigration from the mother country entitled to all the rights, liberties, and immunities of free and natural born subjects. Remember, they were under a monarchy, right? They say, okay, bet. This thing, the respective colonies are entitled to this thing called the common law of England. And more especially, they said, yeah, the common law of England, but more especially to the great and inestimable privilege of being tried by the peers of their vicinage, according to the course of that law. They said it's never been okay in 2026 that nobody's ever told these people to take away a trial by jury in every circumstance that involves life, liberty, or property. They said you will not find a valid law that can do that. All right. They said they are entitled to the benefits of such English statutes as existed at the time of their colonization. Now, here we go. We're finna get in trouble. All right. They said, okay, now this thing called the Roman Catholic religion in the province of Quebec has abolished the system of English laws. Why are we talking about Quebec? They said, no, we've been keeping up. They've been telling us. They said these people in Quebec used to have this thing called English laws. They used to have this thing called a trial by jury. They used to have this thing called, oh, you couldn't take their life, liberty, or property without the peers of their vicinage. They said they went their entire existence never being brought before a guy in a black robe. Never. And now this thing called the Roman Catholic religion in Quebec has abolished the system of English laws, by the existence of whose blood and treasure the said country was conquered from France. They said the Roman Catholic Church conquered France. Go to France today. You'll see it. Yeah, they conquered, buddy. They said, okay, again, this is time number 2. They said they used to name names back in the day. They was not with the foolishness. They said an act of parliament establishing the Roman Catholic religion. They talking about British Parliament. They said, who passed this act said the Roman Catholic religion was allowed here? They said an act of parliament for establishing the Roman Catholic religion and the French laws in that extensive country now called Quebec. They said is dangerous. This thing called the Roman Catholic religion is dangerous in an extreme degree to the Protestant religion and to the civil rights and liberties of all America. They said, therefore, as men and Protestant Christians, we are indispensably obliged to take all proper measures for our security. Who were they fighting in the Revolutionary War? They said the English people in Britain wouldn't fight them. They weren't fighting their cousins. They weren't fighting their homeboys. Remember, I told you King George I and King George II gave legislative sovereignty over to Parliament, right? Okay, well, King George III is not the King of Germany, but he is the Prince of Germany. Y'all ever heard of this place called Charlotte, North Carolina? Okay, well, who is Charlotte? Charlotte was the queen who King George III married. Her name was Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. She was German. People say she was black. She looked pretty black to me. Okay, well, that's what the city of Charlotte is named after. The county in Charlotte is called Mecklenburg. It's a German name. Okay, well, King George III was the prince over Germany. So because the English would not fight them, would not fight the colonists, he contracted mercenaries over from Germany to come fight. So they said, okay, well, yeah, as men, they said as men, as though they weren't, as men, they said them boys in the Roman Catholic, they're not men. They say, as men and Protestant Christians, we are indispensably obliged to take all proper measures for our security. They said, well, we're going to drop bodies over this. This is not a game. You can't just enact a fake legislation and allow the Roman Catholic religion and the French laws to take over over Parliament in Great Britain. What are y'all doing over there? What's going on? And then say we magically owe you without due process of law, without being tried by peers of the vicinage. They said we went our entire existence never being brought before a guy in a black robe. And in 1760, they started setting up people in black robes. In the Declaration of Independence, it say, oh, well, they transported us beyond seas to be tried for pretended event. They didn't go back to England. They went right across the street and got presented in front of a guy in a black robe. And that dude pronounced judgments against them without being tried by the peers of their vicinage. They denied them a trial by jury. They said, so again, we need y'all to admit that by the powers of Britain and the aid of the Roman Catholic neighbors, that they should be able to carry the point of taxation and reduce us to a state of perfect humiliation. I can't say the word. Humiliation and slavery. They said that's what's going to happen. So this is why we're strapping up. They said, make no mistake. They say it 4 times. They said the Roman Catholic religion, the Roman Catholic religion, the Roman Catholic religion, the Roman Catholic religion. They said this thing called the Roman Catholic religion is established. The people there in Quebec are deprived of the right to an assembly, trial by jury, English laws, and civil cases. I told y'all you're supposed to have a trial by jury in all cases. There's not one part of that state constitution where a guy in a black robe is supposed to be determining the law, unless it is a valid international contract. Right? So they said in 1774, we never intended. These are the framers that they talk about. These are the framers of the Constitution. This is the United States Continental Congress. They said the people there in Quebec are deprived of the right to an assembly, trials by jury, and the English laws in civil cases are abolished. Instead thereof, now are French laws established in direct violation of His Majesty's promise by his royal proclamation under the faith of which many English subjects, they said they moved to Quebec because they had the guarantee of English laws, of the common law of England, of a trial by jury in civil cases. They said that's why they settled in that province, and y'all done wrote a fake law and just completely abolished it. Look it up. It's called the Quebec Act. The Quebec Act of 1774. You can Google it. All of this is in the Declaration of Independence. Right? So you get to 1775, they say, all right, Thomas, come clean this up. Because Thomas Jefferson was dang near a genius. He spoke 4 languages. He graduated law school by the time he was like 19. It wasn't law school, but a law program by the time he was 19. He spoke like, how many languages did Thomas Jefferson? He spoke French. They say he spoke German. Dang, I didn't know that. He spoke French, German, Italian. He spoke 5 languages. He spoke 6 languages. He spoke English, French, German, Italian, Greek, and Latin. They said he could read all of the ancient literature in their original language, which I don't have time to go over this right now, but there was no such thing as the Hebrew language. 400 years before the birth of Christ, there was no such thing as the Hebrew language. They said everything was in Greek. Jesus spoke Greek. There was no such thing as the Hebrew language. It had died off. Because and that's another topic. I'm not going to get in trouble on that. I've already gotten in trouble enough. So yeah, this dude, Thomas Jefferson, was not some random guy. Homeboy knew his stuff. He said he could read all the works in their original language. He said he could read Shakespeare or whatever was the ancient works of that day, then in their original language. He could have read the New Testament in Greek. Okay, I forgot what I was talking about. But yeah, the Declaration of Independence. I don't know how we got there, but something about the common law. But yeah, in 1775, in 1774, they say, okay, well, it's the Roman Catholic Church that's doing this. It's the Roman Catholic religion that's doing this. Oh, I got another thing. Let's go to the Constitution. All right, you get to 1775. Oh, yeah, May 14, 1775. We were talking about Georgia. All right, so yeah, okay. Good, thank you. All right, so they said to determine the influence of the principles of the common law, Georgia said we got to look to that law as it stood before May 14th, 1776. What happened on May 14, 1776? This guy named Thomas Jefferson showed up in a place called Philadelphia from Virginia. They said, give me my pen, boys. I got to get to work. He said, I got to get to work. I got to get to it, boy. And so, yeah, they said, okay, in an effort to determine what was the common law at that period, we should consult the decisions of the courts in England previously made, and that such decisions are to be regarded as the proper exponents of the common law as was adopted by our legislator. Now, I don't have a complete thought on this because I don't know. But in certain situations, technically Georgia, because Georgia is one of the original 13 states, and I'm talking about all the original 13 states, should have been able to have Georgia colony cases, and that would be considered English cases. So I don't live in these states, but if you're from one of the original 13 states, I would try to see where the New Jersey colonial cases are. Did they send them back to Great Britain? Like, I don't know where those things are at. I know Philadelphia said, okay, well, or not Philadelphia, Pennsylvania said, well, we dang near just stole everything from the offices. So I don't know if they gave anything back to Great Britain at that time period. But I would try to find, if you're from one of the original 13 states, where the colonial cases are, if there are colonial cases that you can have access to, because those are technically decisions of the courts of England, especially if you can find principles of the common law in there. But that's a nerd thing, sorry. But yeah, that's a question I've always had in the back of my mind. I don't know where the original colonial cases are. But yeah, they said, okay, this thing called the common law, as of May 14th, they said before we became a country, are they going to be on court listener? I doubt it. I doubt it. Most things you'll find maybe before they set up state Supreme Court cases, but I don't think they're going to be on there. I don't know. I don't know. If you live near a law library, or if you can go to your nearest law library, I would ask or call the, whatever that lady, you know who that, the lady at the counter, the clerk of the library or whatever, I don't know, and see if they have any colonial cases that can be read. They might not be digitized though, so I don't know. Um, and the reason I say that is because, again, they're fighting a revolutionary war, right? So a lot of those cases may be corrupted, right? Where they say it may not be according to the principles of the common law. Just like our new cases, you won't find a lot of the new cases according to the course of common law. The latest case that I found, which is not a great litmus test, but the latest case I found from New York, talking about the common law of England, explicitly admitting that New York's law is the common law of England, was from 1973. Okay, so it's gonna be hard to find a New York Supreme Court case in 2026 admitting that the law of New York is the common law of England. So, because we're in the same situation that they were in at the Declaration of Independence. But yeah, so you get to 1775, 1774, they say, who is this? This is the Pope. This is the Roman Catholic religion. These are these Jesuit priests. And then you get to 1775, they say the exact same thing. They just say it a little nicer. They say, okay, well, they got this thing called Admiralty. What's Admiralty? It's international law. That's what it is. It's foreign jurisdiction. And they say, all right, well, we got this thing called Admiralty, and statutes have been passed. They didn't say laws have been passed. They said statutes have been passed for extending the courts of Admiralty beyond their ancient limits, and for depriving us in many cases. Let me see if I can find it. Of a trial by jury, of the accustomed and inestimable privilege of a trial by jury. What's up? Hello? What's up? Hello? I don't know if people know that they are connected.
What are they all sub for?
All right, well, we're going to disconnect. What was I looking up? Boom, here we go. Thomas Jefferson said, Statutes have been passed for extending the jurisdiction of the courts of admiralty and vice admiralty beyond their ancient limits, for depriving us of an accustomed and inestimable privilege of a trial by jury in cases affecting life and property. Say Magna Carta, right? They say, okay, now they got this thing called taxes. For the first time since we landed on American shores, were without our consent. They said since 1607 up until 1776, or let's say 1760, they said we wasn't finna pay that if we didn't want to. So they said taxes for the first time since we landed on American shores were without our consent imposed on us. They said our ancient and inestimable right of a trial by jury was abolished, and the common law of the land made to give place to admiralty jurisdictions. Hello? They'll look you dead in your face and act like, oh, well, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. Thomas Jefferson said this. They said judges were rendered by the tenure of their commissions, same as today, and they said entirely dependent on the will of a minister. They said new crimes. Here we go. No injured party. Here we go. They said they had it too. They said, wait a minute, there's nobody over there but an attorney. They said new crimes were arbitrarily created and new courts unknown to the Constitution, the Magna Carta, instituted. There you go. What they call it, traffic court. Child support court. Yeah, they say, they'll take your kids from you now. What? Yeah, they said, yeah, that's what we do, baby. They said it's the same thing. We ain't doing nothing new. They said it's nothing new over the sun, baby. They say, yeah, they got this thing called taxes imposed on us without our consent. They got these new crimes. They got new crimes now, y'all. What you mean new crimes? Yeah, you don't even have to have an injured party no more. If they write a statute and you violate the statute, oh, well, yeah, that's a new crime, baby. You going to jail. They say, yep, that's the same thing. Yep, Thomas Jefferson said, good luck, everybody. They did the same thing to us. They said new crimes were arbitrarily created. Oh, I love that. And new courts unknown to the Constitution. They said, where did y'all get admiralty jurisdiction in Georgia and in Kentucky? We don't see that in our Constitution. Right? What's in rem? In rem is admiralty jurisdiction. In rem means, well, they can seize it as a maritime prize before you've went to court over the issue. Okay, well, that's the opposite of common law due process. Because due process says you can't prescribe punishment before the trial of your peers of the vicinage, right? Or the vicinage. And so they said this thing called in rem is exclusive to admiralty. They said, how do you know you're in a... Let me go to Washington. I was going to go somewhere else, but I forgot. Washington says this perfectly. Washington State. Oh, Georgia says it too. All right. So they said the Supreme Court of Washington State said, okay, well, the right to proceed in rem is the distinctive remedy of admiralty. And no state, how many states? None. No state can confer jurisdiction upon its courts to proceed in rem. How many? None. No state can do it. Why would you do it? No sovereignty, the people would want that. First of all, if you live in Oklahoma, it would not be possible. There's no water there, right? All right, so they say, yeah, this right to proceed in rem, so they don't have to say the word admiralty. They'll look you dead in your face. Oh, he's going crazy. They think admiralty can be applied on land. It absolutely can. It happens every day, right? Okay, well, they don't say admiralty. They say in rem. Okay, they say this thing called admiralty is distinctive of the admiralty jurisdiction, and no state can confer jurisdiction upon its courts to proceed in rem, nor could federal Congress give such a power to the state, since it would be contrary to the federal constitution. So they said, well, if it's not in your state constitution, well, then you can't do it. So we go to the federal constitution, it's in there, but that's for federal things. The federal things is primarily dealing with international things. Okay, well, the states don't have no international powers. Mississippi can't go to war with Germany right now. No, we got this thing called the United States Corporation. And they got this thing in the United States Corporation called the Marine Corporation. And they will go do the fighting. Right? So the Mississippi can't go to war with Venezuela or Colombia or Brazil. They said Vermont doesn't have international powers. So this right to proceed in rem is exclusively for international things. And no state can confer jurisdiction upon its courts to proceed with international powers. And nor could Congress, federal Congress, give such a power to the state. They say it's not possible. Only we deal with international things. That's our job. That's why the Constitution, the federal Constitution, was created. They said for you, the state, to do this would be contrary to the Constitution, right? So this is the Supreme Court of Washington. They said in another case, a state, what kind of state? Any state in this union, any of the 50, does not attempt to give in rem remedies. They say it again, any action cognizable in admiralty, whether in rem or in personam, is within the exclusive jurisdiction of the admiralty courts. They said whenever a lien, what's a lien? Didn't Thomas Jefferson say, oh, we have unalienable rights? What'd he say? Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. You know what we mean. They said, and they are endowed with their creator with certain unalienable rights. And then they tell you life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And then I got cases that say this thing called the pursuit of happiness means property or can include property. Okay, bet. Thomas Jefferson's not dumb. He knows exactly what he's writing. He already wrote it twice or once already, right? So they said, okay, well, whenever any lien, whenever something is lienable as opposed to inalienable or unalienable, that phrase is interchangeable, is given by a state statute for a cause of action cognizable in an admiralty court, either in rem or in personam, well, only proceedings in rem can enforce a lien. And that is within the exclusive jurisdiction of the admiralty courts. They say Washington State don't have no admiralty courts, right? So they say, and if it were so, it would be in the Washington Constitution. It's plain in the United States Constitution. They say Article 3. Yep, cognizable, what they say, Article 3. Yeah, they got all type of cases. They got cases in law, equity, under the Constitution, under the laws. Then they got this thing called cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction. Okay, bet. When you get to the Washington Constitution, that ain't in there. You get to the Georgia Constitution, that ain't in there. And so they say it again. This is another Washington Supreme Court case. They say no controversy might arise to the meaning of the term in rem as used in our discussions. They said to proceed in rem is exclusively jurisdiction of the Admiralty. Now watch this. They got this thing called the, if you live in Washington State, they got this thing called the Washington Code. Okay, I don't have time. I'm not going to do it right now, but the Washington Code is not the law of Washington. What's the law of Washington? The Supreme Court of Washington State said, well, the common law of England, including English statutes in force at the date of the Declaration of Independence, continues to be the law of Washington. The law, not a law, not kind of a law, the law. What's up? What's up? I keep adding all these people who want to join and then they don't want to join. All right. And so they said, okay, well, Washington has a law, right? And it's not called the Washington Code. They said, based on the Washington Code, the impoundment of a vehicle operated in violation of whatever the citation is, or another citation, is intended to be a civil in rem action. Now, I just read that Supreme Court case that said they couldn't do no in rems. Y'all remember them Franchise Boys? They had a song called Riding Rims, Riding Rims. I don't know who those Franchise Boys are. Anybody from the South? All right, well, they said, well, we don't have no in rem. Where are you getting this in rem stuff from? They said, when we impound your vehicle for violation of a fake statute, that is a civil in rem action against the vehicle. What is in rem? In rem means against a thing, or to the corporate world, it means subject matter. So they say they say they got two types of jurisdictions. They got personal jurisdiction, then they have subject matter jurisdiction. Okay, well, and then they call that subject matter in rem. Okay. Well, they said, when we impound your car, when we tow your car and take it and make you pay the tow company and then pay the courts to get it out, oh, they say, yeah, that's a civil in rem action. Before you've had a court case over the issue, where we prescribe punishment before the jury has had a say-so over your life, liberty, or your property, yeah, they said that's an in rem action. Okay, well, who told you you could do that? Because I read this thing called the Washington Constitution, and I don't see no Admiralty and Maritime in there. Right? So you see, like, oh, somebody is usurping the Constitution of Washington. They say they do this intended to be a civil in rem action against the vehicle. So they say it's not against you, it's against your car. Well, first of all, my car is an inanimate object. Who told you you could do a court case against an inanimate object? They do it every day. We talk about this all the time. They say the computer said you did this. The computer cannot talk, y'all. They say, yeah, we got photograph. A photograph can, they say you violated a statute. Did the statute tell you this? So they say, yeah, this is a civil in rem action against the vehicle in order to remove it from the public highways and reduce the risk posed to traffic. No injured party. They didn't say because you damaged this or because you hit somebody. They said, no. If you violate our fake statute, we're going to impound it. They said, we're going to do it. We published it. They said, we're going to do it. Yeah, we're not here about no common law of England. We don't do that, sweetie. They'll hold you in contempt. People tell me all the time, bro, they hold me in contempt. I get comments every day, bro. They got comments they don't even let go through. I got to go to a little review thing. I get so many, brother, I was in court in this, and brother, I was in court in this. Yep, I wasn't there. I'm sorry. Yeah, they said, we're going to impound it, buddy. Don't worry. We're doing in rem. We're doing Admiralty. Okay, well, Thomas Jefferson said this is the thing we drop bodies over. And so you can't just be taking people's stuff under the guise of law and prescribe punishment before somebody's been to trial over it. That's unfair. That's unlawful. And you've never been given permission to do. Who told you you could do this? They do it every day. Georgia also says this. Let me go to Georgia. And some attorney will get on here and say, oh, well, you don't understand. You haven't been to law school. What? What law school allows you to take, who makes you believe you can just steal people's stuff where there's no injured party? They'll say it. They're confident too. Oh, a crime doesn't require an injured party. It's just a violation of a criminal statute. That's how you know they don't care about people. They're only in it for the money. Georgia. Private property in rim. They said this thing called state legislators. Remember, this is the same thing that happened in England, right? So they said the people who write the laws, this is for them. The people who write statutes, this is for them. Remember, the same thing happened in Britain, where they be writing fake stuff and they presuppose to take away people's life, liberty, and property with no injured party. They said, okay, well, this has already been decided in the Georgia Supreme Court that state legislators have no authority to confer jurisdiction upon state courts to enforce liens by proceedings in rem. Somebody say in rem. I-N space R-E-M. And then you go to this thing called the Georgia Code. And they got 114 statutes that are all talking about in rem. They say, yeah, baby, we don't believe none of that. We don't do none of that common law stuff. Oh, yuck. They said, well, we're here to make that bread. We're not here because you got an injured party. No, this invisible entity called the state of Georgia is the injured party. And we're going to make sure he gets paid for all of your actions. Right? So they said this is what they fought the Revolutionary War over. They said that Georgia's not supposed to have no statutes talking about in rem nothing. They said the only people who can do in rem is the federal government. Or technically, they say only district courts can do in rem. And technically, they do that wrong because they're not supposed to be enforcing in rem stuff in the states. And then the states are not supposed to be enforcing in rem at all. In rem is only for international things. So yeah. Admiralty, that's the thing they went to war over. That's the thing, if you talk about today, they will make you look like a weird conspiracy theorist. They'll say, oh, those sovereign citizens, they think they don't have to obey laws. What? Those are not laws. They said we didn't have a problem with laws. We had a problem with the government not obeying the law. We have a problem with government. We don't have a problem with laws. They say you study the common law of England. They say it come from the Bible. They said we didn't have a problem with laws. There's this king named King Alfred in England. They said, yeah, he compiled all the laws of his day. He said, yeah, all of this comes from this thing called the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue. They said these people called the Anglos and the Saxons, where we get the common law from. They say, yeah, we trace our history back to the people of Moses. We don't have a problem with laws. We have a problem with government not obeying the law. They say it all throughout the Declaration of Independence. The first thing he say, yeah. Let these facts be submitted to a candid world. King George has refused his assent to laws. They said the problem was not us. They said we're not the ones causing this issue here. They said it in 1775. These fake statutes have been passed, depriving us of the law. They said they went to Canada and deprived them of the law. Yeah, so that's it. That's what I got. What else? So if I ask you who were they fighting in the Revolutionary War? That's what they don't want to talk about. Who were they really fighting? Since I'm on Georgia. Yeah, they said the Supreme Court of Georgia said, yeah, if you end up in front of one judge, that's called a cause of Admiralty jurisdiction. They said it. Excuse me. They said prosecuting an information. So an information is a complaint created by an attorney with no injured party to enforce a seizure. There you go. Issues of fact should be submitted for a trial by jury according to the course of common law, but the act does not contemplate the determination of the facts by a judge in causes of admiralty. They said we don't want to hear nothing about the facts and evident. Yeah, no, they said we don't do none of that in the admiralty court. They say whatever the judge decides. Somebody told me that one time. They said, yeah, it depends on how the judge is feeling. How he's feeling? That's not the law. Again, we don't have a problem with the law. We have a problem with government. What else? Let's see. I was going to look up some Declaration of Independence stuff. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Y'all didn't answer the question. So who were they fighting in the Revolutionary War? Declaration. Dits. Hawaii said, when Hawaii joined the Union in 1959, they said the people of Hawaii hereby, let me just read it right, yada, yada, yada. They created their constitution, state government, and their constitution is found to be Republican in its form and in conformity with the Constitution of the United States and the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Then they said again, the Constitution of Hawaii shall always be Republican in its form and shall not be repugnant to the Constitution of the United States and the principles of the Declaration of Independence. You call an attorney tomorrow and ask, is the Declaration of Independence law? They're going to look you dead in your face and say, nope, sure not. It's not binding law. Okay, well, the whole Constitution of Hawaii is founded on it. So we don't know what you're talking about. All right, here we go. I forgot about this. I was going to read this earlier since we're talking about the Declaration of Independence. Okay, well, this is a law book on the Declaration of Independence. They said, yeah, they got this thing called the extension of the jurisdiction of the Admiralty courts in the year 1764 and 1768. They said it was thought the possible extinction of a trial by jury in civil as well as in maritime causes. They said the judges of these courts, what courts? The maritime courts, were royal appointees receiving their salaries supposedly from fines and proceeds of the sale of condemned vessels. See, they always use this fake language with us. So they said, how did the judges make their money during the time of the Revolutionary War? From fines, right? Don't they hold you in contempt every day? Or they give out a fake citation from a police officer and say, oh, well, you can pay it. Who gets that money? You think the government get that money? No, the judge gets that money. They said, I talked about this not too long ago. Well, a legal fiction. Who creates the legal fictions? All these scammers on the internet talking about, oh, you got to get in equity. You got to learn equity. You got to learn about a trust. You got to learn. Okay. Well, who created all of those fictions? They said fictions are created by Roman praetors. Who are the Roman praetors? Those magistrates. What's a magistrate? A magistrate is a judge in a civil case. Okay, well, you get to this thing called 1764 and 1768, and they say the judges of these courts receive their salaries from fines and proceedings of the proceeds from the sale of condemned vessels. So every time they tow your car or put you in handcuffs or give you a ticket or a fine, who gets that money? It's not money, but who gets it? Who gets paid from that? That thing don't go to the government. All of those fictions, they're just reaping these are like, I don't know how to say it, like an investment thing to them. They said they get paid from all of the things that get brought before them. A financial incentive, absolutely. They said during the time of the Revolutionary War, they placed this dude named Admiral Colville, the naval commander-in-chief, on the coast of North America. I told you, they didn't go, they say in the Declaration, Thomas Jefferson's is slick. They say, oh, well, they took us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. No, they didn't. They sent the Admiralty judges here and sent them, instead of going into, they used to have two types of courts in England and in the colonies. They had a court of the King's Bench, and then they had the court of common pleas. Okay, well, the trial by juries were held in the court of common pleas. Okay, so they had their own courts. You had your grand jury, you got your injured party, you got your trial by jury, right? Okay, well, in the court of the King's Bench, the commercial corporate courts, okay, well, that's where they went. When they sent Admiral Colville, whatever, okay, they brought that joke. They took them boys right across the street and brought them before a guy in a black robe. They said, where's the jury? Oh, they said, we don't do that no more. Yeah, no, we don't do that no more. We're here to get these fines and proceeds from the sale of condemned vessels. Okay, well, they weren't talking about ships. They were talking about people. All right, so they said they placed this dude, Admiral Colville, on the coast of North America as the head of the Revenue Service. Dun, 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 dun. They said this is the time of the Revolutionary War. This is it's not called the Revolutionary War. It's called the War of Independence. But they say, yeah, this is what's going on. They got this thing called the Revenue Service. And the chief, what do they call him? The naval commander-in-chief. Yeah, who is that? That's an Admiralty judge, y'all. What did Thomas is not making up stuff. They said, yeah, this is one piece of paper, but we got books on this stuff. They said this has been as early as 1764. They sent guys in black robes over here talking about we magically owe them. And they called it the Revenue Service. This guy, the Admiral, his name was the Admiral. He was the head of the Revenue Service. Okay. Well, there's nothing new under the sun. The same thing happens today. Go to the district court website. Go to the tax court website. They say, no, you don't get a trial by jury here. They said, we got experts. We're very, very knowledgeable on tax law. Oh, I bet you are, buddy. I bet you are. They said, don't worry about the trial by jury. Oh, you don't want them. They're not educated like we are. You don't want a trial by jury. You don't sell the hard copy of your book? I do. It's at constitutionacademy.org. So they said they placed this dude at the head of the Revenue Service at constitutionacademy.org. Only download available. Select the if you're on your phone, select the desktop version. Should be 4 books there. It should be 3 books, 1 an ebook and a physical book. Or open it up in like a private browser. They say they won't let you open it up in certain browsers. But they said, yeah, this thing called the Revenue Service was offenses against the Revenue Act. Okay, so offenses against the Revenue Act were tried in courts of Admiralty. Okay, well, that's the same thing that happened today, y'all. There's nothing new. They're doing the exact same thing. Go to the tax court website, and they'll say, oh yeah, no, you don't get a trial by jury, buddy. We don't do that here. We got experts. We're going to give you a nice little attorney, and then we're going to present you to the judge. And don't worry, your guilt's already been determined, buddy. Don't worry about no common law due process. Yeah, we don't do that. No due process here, buddy. Yeah, we don't do the common law of England. No, no, no. This is an international cause. We sending money to the same guys they fought in the Revolutionary War. Who did they fight, y'all? I'm trying to tell y'all. Y'all don't believe me. Yeah, Yusaville ain't talking about this, is he? No, he's not. Yeah, whatever your favorite scammer is, he's not talking about this, is he? Yeah, they don't tell you the Roman Catholic Church is who they sending money to every week or every April 15th. Yeah, they said this thing called the Revenue Service, we're going to put an admiral there. Yeah. They said, and any offenses against this fake statute or this fake legislative enactment called the Revenue Act will be tried in courts of admiralty. And we don't do no trial by jury there, buddy. You better believe it. We're here to get paid because we get commissions from the fines and the proceeds of a condemned vessel. You will be condemned. We getting paid. You better believe it. Yeah, we don't hear no Supreme Court case law. We don't do none of that. None of nobody. That's corruption, y'all. That's right. They said no cause was ever tried in an admiralty court before a jury. They said not in an admiralty court. That's why we like it. Yeah, we don't do that trial by jury stuff. Why? Because the jury are the judges of the law. You go in front of a jury and say, hey, these jokers are illegally taxing us without our consent. And they going to say, and you can prove it logically? Oh, yeah, they're going to dismiss the case. They said they did that. I got other books that say, yeah. They said the governor's courts didn't have jurisdiction and the juries would not convict. And so these magical condemned vessels would impair the king's revenue. I say, yeah, I bet they were. They calling us condemned vessels. And so they say, yeah, offenses against the Revenue Act were to be tried in courts of admiralty and vice admiralty. Thomas Jefferson said that, yeah, they statutes have been passed extending the courts of admiralty and vice admiralty beyond their ancient limits. Yep, Thomas was right. He said, yeah, no call. We don't do a trial by jury here, buddy. Yeah, none of that. They said, and the authority of the transportation of offenders for a trial was thought to add to the exile of injustice. They said transportation for trial beyond the seas meant revival of an old law passed in Henry VIII. I got a case on this, y'all. I think I read it yesterday. Oh, who was it? They said it was about due process. They said in the reign of Henry VIII met to the undoing of many people, and they had to repeal the act. And they said the revival of an old law. Okay, boom, there we go. Oh, what was it? Oh, we got to search due process. See, it's all painting a picture. I didn't know that. I just learned about Henry VIII. So you start studying this common law, they go over each of the acts of all the kings of that day. And just like I read y'all state Supreme Courts all night, okay, well, in their day, they would read, not really, but they would read I don't know what their Supreme Courts were called, but they would read the reports of whoever the king was of that day. So let's go to due process. Yeah, I can't believe I just caught that. So you be reading this stuff, and then one day you'll paint a picture of it. All right. That's Utah. That's Pennsylvania. Sorry, now I got to find it. That's North Dakota, North Carolina, Tennessee. Boom. No, it's Henry VII. It's not the same guy. But they said, okay, it's not the same one. But they said the Supreme Court of Tennessee said in Parliament, Henry VII violated the principles of the Great Charter under the authority of this act. These two dudes committed horrible oppressions and exactions to the undoing of many people. No, they do say Henry VIII. They say in the year of Henry VIII, this act was repealed on the avowed ground that it was in violation of the charter. I am right. They said, yada, yada, yada. As a result of now, the Tennessee Constitution says that the court shall be open for every man for an injury done to him and have remedy by the due course of law, by due process. See, I wasn't crazy. That's what if you can't prove this stuff, they're going to call you a super sovereign citizen. Right? So they say here, all right, they say, yeah, they got this guy called Admiral Colville. He is the head of the Revenue Service in Great Britain. They said offenses against the Revenue Act were tried in courts of admiralty. They said, we don't do that trial by jury stuff here, buddy. They said, okay, the transportation for trial beyond seas meant the revival of an old law passed in the reign of Henry VIII. That still don't make sense. It may not be right, but it says by which it was made possible to send a person accused of treason into a English court for trial. Who's in charge of the revenue service? Yeah, this book is going over the Declaration of Independence, and they got all these. They've proven everything. They say, yeah, this act right here, this case right here, this, yeah. They say, yeah, this thing called Admiralty is a big deal. And they act like they don't do it. They look you dead in your face and say you don't do it. I got into a debate with an attorney one time, and this attorney, she was trying to make fun of somebody because they were in small claims court asking the judge, well, is this a maritime claim? And the attorney tried to make fun of the lady. And I cited the United States Supreme Court that said, okay, well, Admiralty is as extensive on land as it is upon water. No distinction in the Constitution made on that fact. They said that in the same case, they said, well, Admiralty only proceeds by, or Admiralty only acts by a proceeding in rem. I read it earlier in some other cases, right? Okay, well, I got a United States Supreme Court that says that. Okay, well, Admiralty acts only in rem. Okay, and then this lady was in Kansas. I went to the Kansas Supreme Court case and found that a small claim of $1,100 issued by a bank against the defendant was a proceeding in rem. Okay, so that lady was right to say, okay, well, is this a maritime case? See, they want to make fun of you because they think, well, most people are ignorant, and we weren't told this. They want to make you look like you're a conspiracy theorist. No, the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court of that state said, oh, yeah, if you participate in banking, and a bank makes a claim against you, okay, well, that's an admiralty claim. It's an in rem claim, just like we read in Washington State and in Georgia State. They say, yeah, if they do any of this, this is an in rem. In rem is only admiralty. That's the only thing. See, at common law, you got to have an injured party. We don't have no in rem. You got to have an injured party. Okay, well, in rem is only based on an international claim. Okay, well, all banks are international. There's no such thing as a bank in American law. Right? So all banking issues, that's why there's no banks in the Constitution. They had a treasury. Okay, so there was no such thing as, every bank is international. Every bank. There's no such thing as an American bank. Excuse me. So a small claim, being in small claims court is an in rem action. I got this too. I forgot I got all this. North Carolina says, well, child support's an in rem action. Watch this. Y'all think I'll be making up stuff. Boy, I got proof on proof on proof on proof. Join the Patreon. This is where all my stuff at. I prove everything. You got to be able to prove this stuff. Otherwise, they're going to think you're crazy. Yeah. Talk about Admiralty in court today. They'll have a whole court laughing at you. Yeah, they won't be laughing when I get in there. What'd they say? North Carolina. That's not it. Now I won't find it. Oh, I thought you could prove it. My book is not available on desktop. That's hilarious. I'm gonna go to it right now. Constitution Academy .org, not .com, .org. 1 book, 2 book, 3 book, 4 book. Constitutionacademy.org. Yeah, download like what's that browser called? How do I put it? Brave or DuckDuckGo. Now I can't find the NREM. But I got it. Let me see. If you're on the Patreon, there we go. Search NREM. Let's see. We gotta go to North Carolina. Louisiana. I got all these states. I forgot I got all these states. But we need North Carolina. North Carolina said, yeah, child support. Here we go. The custody of children is an NREM proceeding. They said a divorce action is also considered an NREM proceeding. Tennessee said a divorce is an NREM proceeding. It seized the marriage status, which means they seized the marriage certificate. They said divorce proceeding. See that this is our fault, right? Say we're ignorant. We were ignorant, right? I'm nobody's judge. I was ignorant too. But okay, well, what's the definition of a marriage certificate? You know what a definition of a marriage license or a marriage certificate is? All these words have definitions. They said a marriage certificate is a certificate to intermarry. When white people started, it's a contract. Actually, I got this. I got everything, boy. I don't have everything, but I got a lot. Got over 1,000 pieces of information on this Patreon. In their own words, have any of the other books in it? No, that's just about federal jurisdiction. So you want to learn about commercial law, you want to learn about federal jurisdiction. Well, commercial law is its own book. In their own words is their own book. That's about federal jurisdiction and citizenship and all that stuff. And then you got the courts. You got the physical book of the courts or the digital book of the courts. What was I going to search? Nah, I forgot. North Carolina, NREM, marriage. Okay, yeah, what's a marriage license? A marriage license is a license or permission granted by public authority to persons who intend to intermarry. And this is made by a statute. And they say this thing called a marriage license. Well, I guess I accidentally got it twice on there. Yeah, but yeah, it's on there twice. Intermarry. Okay, well, a license or permission granted by public authority to persons who intend to intermarry. Okay, well, then they got the definition of the word intermarriage. Okay, well, what's an intermarriage? Okay, it is contracting, there we go, of a marriage relation between two persons considered as members of different nations, tribes, families, between two sovereigns of two different countries, between an American and an alien, or Indians or different tribes. And yeah, so if you never intended to intermarry, which you wouldn't need that anyway, but okay, well, you're never supposed to get a marriage license. The Supreme Court or the California court said that the state of, is a party to every marriage contract and is the guardian of their morals. That's dangerous. You don't want them to be the guardian of your morals. Oh, I forgot I found more. Look at this. Here we go. Who is this? Illinois. Illinois said marriage is a three-party contract. The man, the woman, and the state. Oh, you're not supposed to have them in there. That's not their business what's going on. They said this thing called marriage in Illinois is a civil contract. It's not there's no such thing as a common law a guardian of your. If you got a marriage license, the magistrate is a guardian of your morals. That's your daddy now. See, that's why they got this thing called common law marriage. Okay, a common law marriage is not what we thought. The common law marriage would have still been in the presence of the community of the what they call the vicinage. They say you weren't doing marriage outside of community. But if you contract with this thing called the state of, okay, well, they're now the guardian of your morals. And that's why they allow a lot of divorces. And I bet the same thing is true about that child support stuff too. They said marriage is a civil contract where there are three parties: the husband, the wife, the state. And it is a contractual obligation of the contract. There you go. They said this is all according to public policy. This contract is public policy. Dun, 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 dun. Yep, they said all that's in RIM. They said all of that. They said they didn't have none of that in the colonies. They didn't have none of that when the country started. Here we go. So this is the Supreme Court of North Carolina. They said this thing called an Admiralty court cannot have jurisdiction unless it proceeds in rem. They said oh, I do have another case. Watch this. Sorry. They said the first process, this process called in rem, is against ships or goods. They said yada, 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 yada. They said the cause that was brought here into the North Carolina Supreme Court was dismissed because it was against the vessel, and the court of North Carolina cannot proceed in rem. This is nasty stuff. I've heard of people getting their cases dismissed because they addressed this in rem issue. Because North Carolina don't have this stuff in their constitution. So who told them they could do it? They do it every day. They said the cause here reported was dismissed because the vessel could not proceed in rem. They said the prize courts, they call it prize courts. That's when they steal your stuff before you go to court over the issue. They call it a prize because they finna sell it and make money off of it. They said the prize courts have exclusive jurisdiction. So they said the prize courts are in rem because they decide according to the laws of war and the laws of nations. And it said it would be very unsafe to trust the North Carolina courts to decide on those laws. They do it every day. But really, that's not North Carolina. Today, in 2026, that's not North Carolina. This is nasty stuff, y'all. Since the Civil War, we ain't had no state governments. They said They say, yeah, this thing called prize courts where they proceed in rem is decided according to the laws of war. They said in all transitory actions by fiction, the cause of action arises in foreign countries. They said all in rem actions arise from a foreign country. I told y'all, who were they fighting in the Revolutionary War? Okay, well, that's who getting all this in rem stuff today. They said the proceeding, they said this all transitory actions by fiction. What's a fiction? That state ID y'all got. And that car y'all driving is a cause of action arising in a foreign country. I have an English case that says this. They were debating in England one time. I got an English case that says, okay, well, the in the case they were like, oh, well, great, we get a trial by jury if the court case is happening in England. They said no. The court case arose from France. So they said in ancient England, okay, well, if the court case arises in France, if somebody started a court action in France and wants to come to England to have the case or charge the case or whatever, okay, well, we get the common law. They said no, you don't get no common law. If the action arises in England, you get the common law. But if it arises from a foreign country, you don't get no common law, even if the court case is being had in England. Why? They said that's what they sent the black robes for. They said we only deal with contracts. They said that's why you're not in front of this trial by jury today. They said, okay, in all transitory actions by fictions, the cause of action arises in a foreign country. They said this claim that when the police officer hands you a citation, he said the Pope is giving you a ticket. They said the Pope giving out traffic tickets out here in America. They said, yeah, you ran this stoplight, you got to go pay the Pope for that. He said, none of that. And you're going to end up in front of a guy in a black robe to handle that international contract. So this English case, I ain't going to try to find it, but I got it on the Patreon somewhere. They say, yeah, if you get if a cause arises in France and it ends up in England, oh, well, we get the common law. Yay. They said, no, you absolutely do not get the common law. That's an international contract. And it would be bias. You got to see it from their side too. It would be bias if there was a valid international contract and you broke it, and now you think you'll get your buddies from the vicinage to dismiss the case. They said, no. You don't get a trial by jury in a valid international case. Admiralty, when it's applied right, is real. It's a valid form of law. But when it's misapplied, it's not a valid form of law. It's used, what they say, they use it according to the laws of war. This is between nations. Okay, well, you got to understand, people don't like Americans. People don't like America. The United States of America, they don't like it. They don't like us. If you've ever been to another country, you will know that real quick. They say, oh, they think they're better than everybody else. And it's true. We are. We really are. I'm just kidding.